Okay, folks, thank you. Regulatory presentation. Appreciate it. Before we get into the tower panel discussion, I'd like to acknowledge the sponsors for this event. Obviously, none of this could happen if we didn't have some quality sponsors. I'm going to start with the silver sponsors. It's Cadre Industries, Tech, Magnetics, Point to Point, Land Surveyors, Phoenix Tower, SBA, Terracon, Valmont, Vogue Towers. Our gold sponsor is Tower Co. Our platinum sponsors is SMW Engineering. And our title sponsor, Vertical Bridge. So thank you all sponsors. Let's give them a round of applause. Okay, folks, the tower panel is next. I'd like to introduce the moderator for this event. It's Heather Gastelum. Heather's been around the industry for quite some time, and she's a 30-year telecom and construction safety specialist whose career spans tower operations, portfolio management, construction management, and contractor safety, with safety as a primary focus in her career. Heather launched, built, and led T-Mobile's general contractor safety program, developing it from the ground up. Heather is a OSHA authorized construction safety trainer and has served on national industries and boards, including NATE, OSHA, FCC Strategic Partnership, the Telecom Apprentice Advisory Board, and the National Wireless Safety Alliance. Today, Heather is focusing on purpose-driven work through her nonprofit organization called Cowgirl Capable. Nice ring to it. Empowering women through confidence building, leadership development. She is affectionately known as the Telecom Cowgirl. Heather, welcome, and she's going to introduce the panel.
Thank you, Craig. Thanks, T-Man. Yes, I've seen this industry from a few different angles, so that means today we're going to get to some real-world questions. Let me first introduce the group. We've got Josh Broder, the CEO and founder of Verta, focused on next-generation tower and pole development, especially in places where zoning gets complicated. He's building in the places most companies avoid, neighborhoods, municipalities, and highly sensitive zoning environments. So if there's a site everyone else walks away from, Josh is probably taking that one on. Mike Meadows, I love that you guys sat in order. This is fantastic. Mike Meadows is the Senior Vice President of National Accounts at Harmoni Towers, where his world revolves around carrier relationships and nationwide deal making. He sits at the intersection of carrier demand and tower economics. Mike is often the guy the carriers call when they need scale, and the one who has to decide whether he says yes and at what price. We'll go to Craig, since Craig's next in line. Craig Wiess is the Executive Vice President of Carrier Leasing at Tower Ventures, where he focuses on leasing strategy, carrier negotiations, and maximizing asset performance. Craig lives in the world of carrier leasing, where success isn't just building towers, it's filling them. And then Jesse Stiles is the president of Northstar, a boutique developer that focuses on site acquisition, new builds, and regional expansion. So Jesse represents the builder side of the industry, turning raw land into revenue-generating infrastructure. So this means you can see we have a group that can fund it, permit it, build it, and lease it. So really that means there's nowhere we can take this conversation later today. So it'll be a little unfiltered and a little focused on what's actually happening out there, including a couple of new news stories. And we will open it up to questions in a little bit, but first we want to focus on a couple of key topics. So the Wireless Infrastructure Association just recently released their By the Numbers report, and there's a few data points that stood out. In 2025, the industry spent $65 billion, but also lost 26,000 workers. So Mike, I'm going to start with you. So from your seat as a tower owner-operator, how would you describe the overall health of the tower industry?
Thanks, Heather. I think the tower industry is just one part of wireless infrastructure, first of all. So the industry, when it comes to towers, I think is good. It's stable. We heard the M&A guys talk about merger and acquisition opportunities. Recently, Verta, Harmoni, City Switch, Vertical Bridge, all have had successful debt raises. If people stop letting us borrow money, then we're in trouble. So the good thing is they've been oversubscribed at good rates. So the industry's still good. But I do have a question for the audience, actually, Heather, to kind of finish this. Would you please raise your hand if you've been in this industry, wireless, for 15 years or longer?
Look at that.
That's what I was expecting, so that's good. So I can finish the answer. Tower industry is good. Wireless infrastructure in general, though, I think is in a huge transformation right now. 15 years ago, and I know there's people in here because I heard it yesterday, 37 years, 27 years, all these big numbers, people have been around a lot. There were 6 tenant towers that we built in the early stages of this business. And the cost of those towers was half of what it is today. So the industry has been changing. The last few years, and I also heard this on the Women in Wireless Leadership panel this morning, adapting and pivoting. I heard that. That's been happening a lot the last few years, more than ever. And I think what really I see when there's all these people that have 15 years of experience or more is the last few years there has been a tremendous amount of people put out of where they worked for 15 or 20 years. A ton of people. And so you had T-Mobile send 5,000 people home a few years ago. You had Crown that sent thousands home. You've had Ericsson, Nokia just announced, I don't know if you saw that, they're going to send 14,000 people home worldwide. Verizon just sent 13,000 people home in the last 90 days. So there's a lot of people out there in this industry that have experience that are looking for jobs, but we also need new people in this industry. Yeah. If you've been in this industry for 15, 20 years, you've probably you can see retirement at some point on the horizon, but we also need some new people. So I think we're in a tough situation as an industry right now where you have so many experienced people looking for positions today, but in a few years, we're not going to have that anymore because people are going to be going into retirement soon. So.
Well, and the Emerging Wireless panel is later this afternoon, so we'll get to hear from them a little bit. So Jesse, on the developer side, I know you're looking at things a little bit differently on occasion. What do you see from your seat as a developer?
So I think to kind of piggyback off what Mike said, the challenge as a company for Northstar, our roots were in site acquisition for over a decade. I had a site acq firm, and before that I worked in the industry doing the same thing on the ground. I think the quality and the health of the industry depends on who you are. Are you a contractor working in-house at a carrier? Are you an owner and developer of towers? Are you owning a services firm trying to do work for us? And I think how the quality of it is from your perspective. And I would say that where there used to be 6 tenant towers, when cheap ground rents and costs of construction were 50%, you basically fell into a successful site with an outstanding IRR no matter what you did. One of the big challenges, culture change we had to undertake a few years ago was we always, for years, prided ourselves on getting difficult sites done, no matter what it took to get it done. Hard landlord, hard zoning, whatever it was. We now have about 8 or 9 stops along the way from when we get offered a site to when we put shovel in the dirt, when we still have to reevaluate, are we going to build this asset? And that's very, very frustrating. So instead of being an industry that's based on just get it done no matter what it takes, now we have to think about, is this going to be a profitable asset for us? So while I don't think any of the gentlemen up here are crying poor, it is a challenge even for us. We cannot just back into successful assets just because we wake up every day and push every site as hard as we can.
Yeah, so Josh, on the boots on the ground sort of mentality, we talk about high tech, we talk about how many people have left the industry, we talk about the changes in the technology and the rents and everything else. How much do you think old school boots on the ground, making those relationships with the landlords still matter more than, say, having AI scrub stuff for you?
Yeah, it's a really good question. When I think about listening to what Jesse just said about like the fruit's a little higher on the tree, I think about this tension between you've got a hard site, you got to do what it takes to get it done, and also keep the carrier's business case pressurized. Because I think this sea change, this shift on requiring not just a timely site, but a site that fits within a very narrow, very like increasingly shrinking budgetary box requires really thoughtful approaches to development. It's not like a cookie cutter thing that you can crank out. And so what we actually see on the carrier side is increasing deployment of AI to identify areas of optimal coverage need and to evaluate their business case. But I think in terms of the fundamental development of trying to find something that's creative that just because you can get it and it requires a fencing system that drives the site up to $500K of capital, doesn't work. That does require, I think, thoughtful, boots on the ground, community sensitive developers still.
Thank you for that. So, Craig, I'm going to shift over to you. So there's still a lot of capital available in this industry. We're all well aware of some of the checkbooks floating around trying to purchase structures. So what are you hearing as far as capital build programs from the carriers that you're interacting with?
Well, that's what I was going to touch on. We heard in the M&A panel that valuations are high and continue to be high, and so that's good and healthy for the tower industry, obviously. But we're also talking about employment issues in our industry as well. So if you think about how busy our clients were, I think about it from the leasing side, how busy our clients have been previously, and now they're being asked to do more with less help. So yes, we're pleased. Our number one metric is CapEx spend from the carriers, and we're excited to see those headlines and commitments over several years from AT&T and Verizon and the like. But if our individual contacts and those that we work with are that much more strained, will they be able to execute what we all need to have a healthy ecosystem? So that might be a little bit of a yellow light, I guess.
So Mike, go ahead, Josh.
I would just love to add that because I think that's such a great point about this yellow light moment because of what's going on over at those carrier teams. I actually think they need more creativity and problem solving on the front end from tower developers and owners. It's not like, hey, here's 100 sites that we got to have by this date, go get them done. It's like, yeah, we have coverage challenges, we have to decide whether we can meet them or not. If you guys have great ideas about how we could solve this, bring them to us. And that's always been true, but it's never been more true than now because of how saturated those small carrier teams are.
I'd like to pile onto that a little bit too, and sort of touching on the AI piece. I think that another sea change that we're experiencing is the carriers are no longer, I call it the 80-20 split. It used to be you built your reputation as a site act firm or as a developer by getting the really hard sites done. And because of the financing, because of the numbers that are involved with the new MLAs, we're really finding lately that the carriers value the 80% of easy sites, that the round peg, round hole, when you get the square peg trying to go in the round hole, they lose interest. It's either going to cost too much, they don't have the in-house expertise to manage the complexities. We're finding that those 20% sites are really just a drag on your performance unless it's a very, very high-ranked site. And oftentimes, very difficult sites don't have a high metric for the carriers. So that's something we're also adapting to.
Thank you for that. So Wireless Estimator just ran a story last week, I'm sure you all saw, where a 6,000 macro tower build could kick off the U.S. rural infrastructure cycle. So if the Broadband Equity Access and Development Program, I know we all throw a ton of acronyms out in this industry, but I wanted to spell it out for those of you that aren't familiar with the BEAD funding. That was initially intended for fiber to sites. There's a lot of ways to get fiber to a cell site, and it's certainly most expensive to do it in the ground. So if that program were to be shifted and 6,000 new macro towers became available, do you believe this industry is operationally ready for that kind of surge? I'm going to open that up to any of you. Don't fight over it, but...
I can only speak from our personal portfolio. You know, we acquired a number of divestiture sites from the carriers. So we fortunately do have a cost-effective, cost-efficient, low expense is what I'm trying to say, rural portfolio. So should we get a rural BEAD funding, obviously working with the government would be cumbersome in some ways, but that would be a nice shot in the arm, and I can only speak for our personal portfolio.
Yeah, I would say that that would be very welcome news if that happens. First of all, it would be a challenge for us to handle. You know, I'm not going to say that it's easy to deploy that many sites, but there's a lot of us out there. So I do think that it would be a great challenge and a real opportunity for the business in general. But let's also see what the next step is. And we know there's expansions in FirstNet and other things in the rural landscape, also satellite, we talked about this morning some, but I think it can be done because most of us have capital to spend and we're trying to make sure we spend all of it. And so the struggle is more of not, you know, usually we have the capital, we don't have enough projects. Okay, so you throw a bunch more out there, I think it's a great opportunity for the industry.
I think that, yes, the industry could absorb that much new work, but I'm going to throw a little cold water on it from a political standpoint. Those of you that know me know I have a pretty strong political background. I think it's very unlikely that BEAD money is going to get thrown at privately held MNOs to develop even rural assets. I really don't see that happening, and there's so many political headwinds on the optics on that, and I just don't think it's going to happen.
Well, we'll all hold our breath and see what occurs. So let's shift gears for a minute. So we've all seen a lot of discussion lately around how relationships across the industry are evolving, especially with network strategies. The EcoStar Dish situation is a good example of that. So we've got towers out there that were built, some of them zoned and permitted, but some of them built and already leased up. In some of those cases, there's still open questions around how parts of that ecosystem are ultimately going to be compensated as these larger spectrum transactions potentially move forward with one entity versus the other. And I know there's a few different ways to split this, different angles. So Mike, from your perspective, how does a situation like this shape the way our industry thinks about risk and long-term partnerships?
So obviously the larger the tower company or larger real estate holders, they can absorb some of this boost churn that's happening. Returns aren't going to be as good as they were before, but they can absorb some of it. But what I think is really unfortunate, and also we are in litigation, so I'm going to keep this very headline level. You know, frankly ticks I think a lot of people off in this room is how it impacts the service vendors and the service providers. So the services business usually is pretty tight margins to begin with. Payment terms had already been pushed out till who knows when for a lot of people. And so that was already a lot to manage in the services business to begin with. And then you get to the point where you get a call or an email that you're not going to get paid at all. yeah, I think challenge is an understatement. It's going to crush some people. And frankly, it ticks me off, but hopefully things turn out for the better at the end. But, I think frankly, I think it's kind of a long, ugly road ahead for the industry to get through this.
Craig, how about you?
In 27, I will have been in the business for 30 years, and so from a tower owner perspective, we always looked at that risk in previous cycles as the leases had value and the network had values. It's a new game today because now this spectrum is going to a satellite provider, and so far there's no one to step in and pick up that network. So this is uncharted territory for our industry, so we've always looked at the bankruptcy risk. We've always come out of it well in previous cycles. This one is a bit of unknown. Fortunately, we were just lucky that we don't have a lot of dish exposure, couple of sites, but we were fortunate, and it's just a fortunate timing.
So Jesse, on the builder side, I'm sure you can help elaborate on the gut punch to the contractors.
Real quick, sorry to interrupt, but on the tower owner valuation side, not being valued, it's zero, just so everybody's clear.
Like Mike, I will say that Northstar is in that litigation as well, so I'll keep my comments pretty narrow. I do think, I believe your question was whether the contractor base could, I think that those that survive will certainly be able to pick up the work. And I hate to say this as a former services guy, it may even play into the favor of some of the tower developers like ourselves, because some of those companies will be even more eager to accept bids that they might not have originally been willing to do. Certainly not something we take pleasure in, but we do find we e-bid a very large number of GCs on every job to keep prices as competitive as possible. And no matter how competitive it gets, we almost never get a contractor declining to continue bidding. So my point is, even though it's a race to the bottom, unfortunately, I do think most folks will find a way to survive.
I appreciate that. Josh, Starlink has come up a couple times already today. Do you think from your perspective it's going to complement the industry as it has started out to? Do you think there's any threat there? What's your opinion on Starlink's play?
On the balance, I think of it as a strong complement, and it makes mobile service even more valuable because the phones that people carry in their pockets solve even more problems in more places. And so I think when you think about the general utility of wireless, I think it's a net positive. I do think it's true that in the most ultra-remote places that might have someday theoretically received tower build activity under whatever business case or source of funding, some of those ones at the very edge may never get built. But I think for towers that exist, towers that are in places where there's enough users that trying to migrate those users onto satellite and running into sort of the physics of even at very low Earth orbit, the distance that the satellites are and the density of users and costs of that data. I don't think of it as a threat to the existing base, but when you sort of zoom way out, I think it's probably makes the product set even stronger and more useful to consumers. And if there's any headwind, it's that some towers that might have theoretically been maybe wouldn't become. I would say in this cycle, neutral to satellite, there's no appetite to build those towers in this environment anyway. And so I'm talking about a theoretical future that might have never come true anyway.
I very much agree with that. And I'd like to go back to my 80-20 analogy I made earlier. I think this will make the 20% of sites, whether it's bad ROI in very rural areas or highly difficult zoning in a densification situation, this will become what small cells became a long time ago, where they will exhaust it and say, okay, we're not going to build the macro. The customers are going to get 50% service improvement by being able to go to satellite. I also think what we'll see is exactly what Josh said, that the sites that won't be. I don't see decommissioning happening on macros. There's too much pot commitment to them. There's also too much network value out of them. I do believe that what we could see is a reduction in very rural search rings ever issued in the future. I think that will be something that we see.
Well, and there's still a lot of capacity that's being used on all of those macro sites. So I know 6G came up on the M&A panel, but again, even if there's not a technology that's going to hang its hat on 6G, there's still a ton of customer demand that's not going anywhere, in my opinion, away from macro towers. I don't think any of you would probably disagree with that.
Hey, Heather, if I could just chime in on that
Sure.
on that point. So definitely a lot of mobility demand here. Folks are still asking for more while they're on the move. But I think fixed wireless access, if there's been a success story out of 5G, it's really been around the persistent ability for the carriers to continue to deliver hundreds of thousands of new pops every period in fixed wireless access connections. And so, I heard yesterday for the first time, I was talking to some wireline investors, and they said something like, we've got, we might hit 40% share in this territory against, this is a cable company converting to fiber. They said we might wind up at like a 40% equilibrium with this other overbuilder. I said, 40%, that's kind of lower than you guys normally talk about as your end state. They said, 10 or 20% is going to land with FWA. And so he said it so casually that it occurred to me that maybe it's a foregone conclusion that FWA is a really durable player even in places that have highly competitive, wireline footprints.
So there was another recent little news blippet. We don't need to get too much into this, but we have them sitting here, so I thought I'd get their opinion. There was a recent story about the potential of SBA and Crown going back to being private. Any opinions you want to share?
Well, the valuations are very different today than they were, and I think that's across all the public tower companies. Americans seen some of that as well. But I think when I left Crown, the valuation, and this is not my fault, okay, so don't blame me. But it was $100 and some billion market cap. It's a lot lower today. SBA is a little lower, but not the cut that Crown has taken. So I guess my point is that's possible, but you still have to look at the market caps today of how much it would take to get those companies to be private. Still would be a chunk of change. So, but we'll see. I mean, I think everybody these days would prefer to be private. A lot of people, at least. But we'll see what happens.
Are you guys ready for some potential wild questions out of the crowd? Josh, did you want to chime in?
I was just going to say on this public-private thing, a lot's made of the valuation disparity between private tower companies and their public competitors. And I think that logic doesn't necessarily follow through to those large public competitors becoming private and automatically receiving a bump. I think it really has to do with sort of where they are in their tenancy lease-up journeys. And so those most mature tower portfolios have the highest cash flows and the lowest multiples, whereas young portfolios, low cash flows, high multiples. So I think this really has to do with style and flexibility of investment rather than some kind of magical valuation change or outcome.
Who has a burning question sitting in their back pocket they want to throw at these guys? Anybody? Well, that's a shocker. I know a few of you sitting in this room.
Does anybody foresee another fourth carrier on the horizon, or is that dead?
No.
Absolutely not. Let's be happy to keep three very healthy ones that continue to build out and maintain the networks they have and not just churn their tenancies to save a nickel.
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest adaptions we've had to make over the last, say 15 years is the expectations and the scrutiny on new builds today versus, I think, Jesse, you said it earlier, you could have built a site anywhere and probably made money on it 15 years ago. And today, we're happy with three. Expectations are different for investors and debt holders. But, as I said earlier, the business is good.
I think the digestion of consolidation in this period, so everybody having total clarity about what the future of Boost was going to be and sort of the T-Mobile completion of the U.S. Cellular acquisition lands the industry in kind of a perfectly competitive place. And so, sure, we'd rather have 4, 5, 6, 7, 10 would be better, but actually there's just really robust competition, and competition on, not just retail pricing and packaging, but network strategies. And so I think we're in a really good competitive place where we would expect continued robustness in that competition. And I think the United States remains a place where sort of relative cellular competition drives a CapEx intensity that's like 2x the next most productive market in the world. And so I think we're lucky to have that, but I also think the market structure at 3 is probably a sustainable place to maintain that kind of intensity.
Well, and there's only so much spectrum allocated to wireless, so there's that. So anyone else? Last call for
what about
questions.
Could you guys talk about the challenges of stealing each other's tenants or stealing from Crown or American Tower, like the high rent reload programs, and what impacts those have on your portfolio, how you value that risk, and how much you participate in these programs, because they've been...
I'll rephrase that to rent reduction.
Yeah, I know no one up here would steal anything, so no doubt. Yeah, look, we can no longer, I think what you heard about building towers in this environment, you can no longer operate on an old model, right? So if you want to operate on a model that's a decade or 2 decades old, you're going to lose money. So if you're going to go build next to somebody for a single tenant tower, you sure better have the economics right, as expensive as steel is these days and everything else, to make it work. But it won't be valued the same. So those towers are not as valuable. They're, again, you can't operate on an old model and expect to poach or have the growth. So they're more expensive to build. You better get your economics right on the front end, and those towers are not as valuable.
I'd look at it from 2 directions. From the carrier perspective, carriers have sites that cost $10,000 a month now that have been escalating for 30 years at 4%. Those sites are dead meat. Like, if you own those sites, you got to be worried about what's going to happen at the sites, because somebody gets out of bed every morning at your customer to try and figure out how to solve that problem. And industry will figure that out. I also agree with what Craig said, that the idea of putting like a tower right next to another tower for a single tenant is not a great investment. And so I think thoughtful rent reduction programs that drive sites that can grab multiple tenants, and particularly moving off of like suboptimal structure types, like transmission co-location and busy rooftops and water tanks, like some of those initiatives might make a ton of business sense. And so
Especially
I think
100-year-old buildings that are falling down around your site.
all of that. We recently did a relocation off a building that had sort of a roof integrity problem. Their roof failed, and so their choice was wait for this roof to get rebuilt and put something on, or to have an alternative structure. And that's a great relocation problem, because we knew it would be a problem for everybody.
I very much agree with that. I think that if you're going to do an alternative site location for some reason other than just rent, I think you have a reasonably decent chance of having a quality asset for the long term. But if you look at the companies that have tried to do just rent-based relocations, there's not a lot of those folks flourishing right now, is my opinion. So I think that a blend can work for a tower developer. Is maybe a handful in a larger conventional portfolio. Occasionally the MNOs put pressure on a developer from time to time who doesn't do those types of sites to do them in exchange for taking a larger tranche of what shall we call conventional build-to-suit work. But I think you have to be extremely selective in what you accept.
Were there any more? Okay, we're gonna shift gears a little bit, loosen things up with a little lightning round, and get to know the guys a little bit more. So if you could simplify one part of how projects are executed across the industry, what would it be? Josh, let's start with you.
Oh gosh, that's a tough question. I'd say projects changing hands less between participants in the project, more integration.
Mike Stump, do we want to jump?
Come back to me on that one. Let me think about that.
I can think of a lot of bottlenecks, in our projects, from, frankly, the length of time it takes from an inquiry to a commenced lease. can be years at sometimes from carriers. Obviously, there are the municipality differences in terms of zoning and just having a permitting office and this and that and the different requirements. And of course, we just heard about the SHPO issues that are always a challenge in terms of historical and environmental. So I'm jumping in with a few answers there, sorry.
That's okay.
I'm going to give an extremely boring answer, and I would say it would be everything associated with regulatory because of the burn time and how it has to be done in a consecutive fashion. We can't really parallel path anymore like we used to a long time ago with going back to margins being so tight. We can't do that. Additionally, it's something that we can't get our arms around ourselves. We have to rely on third-party experts to handle all of that. If we have a difficult landlord, we can send somebody out in a truck to go meet them. If we have difficult zoning, we can take it back from the vendor and do it ourselves. We're really good at that. But with regulatory, there's nothing we can do. We're completely at the mercy of third parties.
So again, we have the emerging wireless panel a little bit later this afternoon. If you could give your younger self one piece of advice in this industry, what would it be? Mike, do you want to start?
Sure. I do think this is a great place to come to gather knowledge from all those people that raised their hands earlier. So I am curious to see how many people do we actually consider emerging professionals. In this industry, it's under 15 years. I would think that in most industries, that might be 2 or 5. So I think coming to events like this and these guys, Craig and Steve started this, I guess it's 14 years ago or so. I think this is a great place to get knowledge. So attend industry and your state wireless events as much as you can.
Craig, how about you?
I guess I knew it at the time, but I guess the advice I would give, and it touches on this too, is it's all about relationships, right? So it's the relationships here in this room, the relationships with the carriers, and those things are facilitated through the wireless associations and events like this. So it is a relationship business. It makes the difference between moderately successful and very successful. Are the relationships in this industry, and the longevity of the people in the industry allow those relationships to cultivate and develop. So keep that in mind.
That's exactly what I was going to say, and I'll add, no, that's fine. That's great. You've been doing this longer than me, and you said the same thing. Relationships, you can't AI that. And one of the things I've done in my career that I think has been reasonably successful, and I would urge emerging professionals to do, is take the time to go meet your customers' middle-level managers or even their low-level managers, because in 10 years, those are going to be the directors. Go take them to lunch. Go take them to happy hour. Build those relationships. And also for the very youngest and the newest in the industry, do not take the opportunity to work remote if given the opportunity. Go to the office. Invariably, there will be cuts coming someday from whatever organization you're in. It happens. You don't want to be an anonymous name on a spreadsheet for somebody in Chicago, New York, or LA to see, and they have no clue who you are. Humanize yourself to these senior managers as much as you possibly can. I know it's annoying, and everybody wants to think they can work from home. I implore you not to do that in the first phase of your career.
That's excellent advice, and I think that everybody that's been here, that's how we grew up in the business, right? We were going somewhere, we went to see our customers, we made road trips to see our customers, and one thing this industry is good at, Heather, is happy hour.
Well, I was going to say that. Yeah.
There are some experts at happy hour in this room,
Yep.
and that's because we've been doing it for a long time, so
It's
great advice.
Did happy hour start at lunch today? Is that what I know?
Yes, I was like, they're waiting for us to, they're like, listen, you got like 5, come on, you got to go.
But there really are a lot of relationships built in the lobby bar at trade shows like this. So if you are on the financial side and you're a manager that is being challenged to send some of your newer people to a trade show, please say yes, because that's how our careers are expanded and developed. We don't grow sitting in the office 24/7, 365. We need to get out there, meet our peers, learn from each other. And yes, the lobby bar is part of that equation. It's just the way this industry runs. So one final question, since you brought up regulatory and we followed the regulatory panel, if you could magically fix one thing in the regulatory world, you only get to pick one, what would it be? You can't say all of it.
Well, we've made great progress with tribal. I was just telling one of the gentlemen up here before we got on that I remember one time we had a site, I had to fly a tribal representative from Oklahoma to somewhere in the Midwest, and they were put up in a Ritz-Carlton. They were driving in a rented Escalade, and they never got out of the truck once for a week, according to my contractor. So we've made great strides there. I want to emphasize a little bit of positive. I think that SHPOs probably would be the next thing that I would say. We have a site in a state upper Midwest right now that we're on delay because the snow is still so deep that the archaeologists from the state SHPO office can't get out there to examine the soil. While I understand the significance of sound, smart regulatory, I think we need to bring some common sense into it at some point, and that's something where we could make some more strides.
I'd like to see at the FCC a more truncated and available staff-driven adjudication process so that all of these advances that we've made, like actually the rule book's not terrible, but that we have sort of like timely adjudication of, hitting the end of the road with a counterparty on this.
I do think this is the first time, at least maybe it's happened in the past, but we've had 2 government shutdowns and here very recently, and it's the first time where you're like, well, we just got through one. And anyway, that impacts FCC, FAA, a lot of stuff that's going on out there. So maybe, wait, if I fix the government, you said I could fix one thing?
One thing.
Okay, yeah, then it'd probably be the national debt, and then we wouldn't have any of that. Then all of those processes would be moving much quicker. How's that?
Craig, you want to wrap us up?
No, that's it. Is I mentioned the labor stresses in our industry, but think about the government as well. So you had cuts, you've had multiple shutdowns as well. So the government and regulatory agencies that we all rely upon to get things done, if you thought they were overwhelmed before, they're going to be more overwhelmed now. So it slows things down. So everybody have a little grace for everyone, and we can have a healthy and thriving industry.
Well, help me thank the gentleman for coming this afternoon and answering our questions. And we ended on time.